briefly, I hope, are you recording? About Gemini. And those of you who are veterans at the Zodiac Lounge, I'm going to ask you a question, and those of you who are veterans will know this pretty immediately. How many signs do you have in you?
All of them.
All of them. So when I talk about Gemini, I don't want you to go like, well, I'm not a Gemini, so that doesn't apply to me. So who cares? It does apply to you because some manifestation of Gemini exists within you. So it's very important whether you have the sun in Gemini, the moon in Gemini, or your Gemini rising, it impacts you because Gemini is somewhere in your astrological makeup. That's the first thing I'm going to say. Here's the second thing. In my experience of some 25 years as being an astrologer or studying astrology, I have found that there are two signs, at least two, there might be a third one, that are among the most maligned signs of the zodiac. The first one is my sign. Of course I'm going to say that because it's my sign, which is Scorpio, right? So people hear you're a Scorpio like, oh, you one of those. You like an arachnid, that scurry around and do all kinds of manner of evil things and stabbing people in the back or something like that. Which might be true for some random Scorpio, but how bad can the sign of Mahalia Jackson be, right? Right? So, or Whoopi Goldberg, don't answer that. All right. The other sign is Gemini. And it really cracks me up because people say a range of the same things with Gemini. They'll say like, oh, you two-faced it. And if you're being gracious, you don't want to correct their horrible grammar and be like, no, bitch, I'm two-faced. Right? So you actually have to deal with that. So what is it that we fear and are so annoyed by with Gemini? So that's what I want to talk to you about briefly today. And I'm going to tell you something. Gemini is a duality. It's the twins, where we're dealing with a little bit of this, a little bit of that. The contrast between one thing and another. Now you might say like, well, that's not annoying. Well, let me get to the juicy part. Let's go back for a quick second. You might remember I said Aries becomes the initial burst of energy of I am from that amorphous glob of being that we call Pisces, symbolically. Then it crystallizes and takes form and gains rootedness in Taurus. It gains sensuality. It gains the sense of being a self in a body. But that can become too rigid. And so there's a need to diversify, a need to kind of stretch and go beyond the limits of just what is physical to the dimension of something that's a lot more complex. And that brings us to Gemini. And there's a certain idea of diversity or difference or multiplicity that's implicit in Gemini. And I believe that is something that is what many people find most annoying. Because we all want to experience a sense of rootedness, going along a particular track, having things move and work a particular way. But Gemini isn't about that. Gemini is about shifting and changing and being dynamic and fluid and going from one thing or this to that. Now, what's so disturbing about that? Because you can't necessarily pin it down. You can't have it fixated in one particular way. And so many people will find, for instance, the moon in Gemini, as example, I found this most disturbing because people want to deal with the emotions, which is the moon. They want to deal with the moon being a particular way, being more grounded, more emotional, more coming from the gut. But Gemini is thinking along with the gut, kind of relating one thing to another. So I also call this like the wheel and dealing, or let's make a deal moon, as an example. Now, to give you an example of this, you can think Barack Obama. Barack Obama has a moon in Gemini. Now, a lot of people find something disturbing about Barack Obama. You can say it's his complexion, his race, his mixed race, his politics, any number of things. But one thing related to astrology that I think also contributes is his moon in Gemini, where he's processing information and relaying it from one thing from another, rather than just having a set allegiance along a particular track. See, most people want things to kind of go like, well, you do this because you're my friend. We family. We whatever. We have some kind of tight allegiance that works one particular way. That is not something that the moon in Gemini, or Gemini in general, is going to do. Gemini is how one experiences the idea of risk, taking this, that, and trying to figure out what's the truth between the two. So one thing I might give you as a crystallization of understanding Gemini is how it deals with the curiosity of what happens between things. Now, what can be possibly dangerous about curiosity? A lot. Because when you lose sight of curiosity, when you lose sight of being curious about what happens if, then you can kind of go into like a set dimension of life where there's a structure and a stability and everything becomes eternal and nothing shifts. And when nothing shifts, let me tell you, as all human beings that I believe we're all human beings in this room, you won't grow. So Gemini reflects that essence of how we deal with the curiosity, the risk-taking to go like, well, what if I do this? And what if I do that? Or what happens if this happens? To be able to go toward a different level of being. So in the development of consciousness that we call the zodiac, because that's what it really is, it's the story of becoming for all of us, not just for one sign. Because some people will think like Pisces. Well, Pisces must be the most evolved sign of the zodiac. I'd be like, have you met Pisces? So no. And that, of course there are some Pisces who are very evolved, but there are also some Arians who are very evolved too. It doesn't go along that spectrum. God happens in every moment of the zodiac.
Yes.
And that's the deeper message of it. Gemini reflects the essence, that moment of divinity that deals with the curiosity, the difference and the distinction between one thing and another. Another person who's emblematic of that I have to mention is Prince. So Prince was always experimenting, always in the studio, doing things. Another famous Gemini, Tupac. We're still digging out his music. So it's always dealing with the dynamic of figuring out, what if I play with this, and what if I do with this, and what do I do with that? So what becomes a transformation point for us to get beyond fearing Gemini? It's really dealing with comprehension, moving from curiosity to looking also at the bigger picture. One danger that can happen for Geminis where they get comfortable, where they can get locked in like Taurians or locked in like Aries in their particular modality, is that they can think that curiosity and just doing a little bit of this and a little bit of that is all that one needs to do in life. And that's not it. You can get petty. You can get small. You can get so consumed by the small questions that you can't think about the bigger aspects of life. And the bigger aspects of life, comprehension, is much more intuitive. It's not just about the data you amass. It's not just about how you string this particular curious fact to this particular curious fact. It's being able to see the grand scope of things. The grand scope of things comes from the heart. Gemini reflects how we find that dynamic first in the mind, and then sets its battle against the heart. But a Gemini only gets to the level of transcendence when the mind becomes friends with the heart. And you don't play them against each other. Because Geminis will use that what if to dismantle their own inner life. Let me give you an example. Someone might say to you, you don't have any business doing or dealing with that bad boy over there. Gemini goes like, I just heard you say, that's a curious and interesting bad boy over there. I'm going to go and say hello and introduce myself and see what happens. Meanwhile, the heart is already saying, girl, don't fuck with him, don't fuck with him, don't fuck with him. No, go away, go away, go away. But they're still going to have that curiosity. So how do they resolve that? Well, you listen to the heart, and then you don't have to obey it initially, because telling a Gemini, like, just obey it, is not going to make sense. Because they have to be curious and play with the thing. So it might be you just talk with the bad boy and resonate and listen to your heart, and your heart might be saying, like, yeah, he's fucked up after all. But maybe not. So the key thing that we have to acknowledge about the Gemini within is recognizing that the what if can lead us to different horizons. But it's not the thing that compels us to have to settle in these new lands. What helps us settle in new lands that we're curious about, that we experience and experiment, is from the heart. And you can't do that with only half of yourself. You have to integrate the heart with the mind, and that becomes the whole person and leads us to Cancer. Next time. Thank you.